a lot of here today with us. And as a head of my dialogues about this project, I'm so honored to introduce you our today's lecturer, Professor Chжan Wэй-wэй from Fudань University, Shanghai, and director of the Institute of China. So thank you very much for coming. We're so happy to see you right now in Moscow.
With a pleasure.
And for your lecture today, the weather finally became more, let's say, comfortable and nice instead of, this everlasting raining. So today we are going to listen your lecture about the China model and its possible global implications. I think it's very intriguing and interesting for everyone today. So, Professor, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for coming. And I think if you have any question, we will have a chance to ask it, but after the lecture. And if you're able to speak Chinese, and if you want to ask your question in Chinese, it's also okay. So everyone is welcome. Please start.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure and honor to come to this particular library and to address this very important topic, the China model and its possible global implications. And I will speak for about 35-40 minutes, and then we throw the floor open, and you can ask any questions, no taboo, and we will discuss whatever issues you are interested. So this is basically the arrangement we have for this afternoon. And so I will start my lecture. Not long ago, at St. Petersburg Economic Forum, your leader, who Chinese also like, Vladimir Putin, said China managed to create a very peculiar but rather efficient model of economic development, more efficient than in the United States. I think it's a fair assessment. And in fact, I will show you, I began to talk about the Chinese model 20 years back. And I said in a short article for New York Times back in 2006, which means slightly before Vladimir Putin, the Chinese model is better than American model. So let me discuss this with you one by one. Interestingly, a few years ago, there was a question from Quora about China. Why don't the educated Chinese revolt against the communist rule and bring about democracy in China? Then a Chinese student from Shanghai, he just displayed the two pictures. One was Shanghai's Pudong era in 1990, and then the year 2010. He said, that's my hometown in 1990 and in 2010, and explains everything. In other words, her explanation is very simple. Performance, our system had delivered more than your system, full stop. So this is a very short and clear answer. Now, here are the basic statistics about the rise of China. And I'll discuss behind this, what's the China model. And China has registered a GDP growth rate roughly 8% a year for over 40 years running. And for trade growth, roughly about 14% a year for 4 decades. Its total GDP by purchasing power parity, I quoted from Putin's figure, which is based on World Bank's latest figure, by purchasing power parity was $35.31 trillion for the year 2023. If you look at the United States, 27.4 trillion for the US. So Chinese GDP was roughly last year 25% larger than the US economy. That's by purchasing power parity. If we use official exchange rate, it's smaller than the United States. But if we use the purchasing power parity, it's larger, and even much larger. And I, like Vladimir Putin, prefers to use purchasing power parity because it's far more reliable than US dollar dominated GDP. I've traveled to over 100 countries. That's my feeling from the field visit. PPP is indeed better than other system of calculation. Of course, it's not the best. We are exploring what will be the best, but that's always on the way. But compared with other calculation, purchasing power-based estimation is more reliable. And China total trade reached $6 trillion US, which means China is the largest trading nation in the world for many years already. And China has eliminated abject poverty, which means China has created the world's largest middle class. Over 770 million people were lifted out of extreme poverty. And this standard for lifting poverty is quite reasonably high, because it means enough for food, enough for clothing, but also three guarantees: guarantee for compulsory education, guarantee for medical insurance, and guarantee for housing. So this is the Chinese criteria for eliminating the extreme poverty. And China also became the world's largest exporter of tourists. So by the year 2019, that's the peak before the COVID, 150 million visits were made from China to other countries. So roughly the Russian population, yeah. And of course, with COVID, the figure went down, and now it's gradually picking up. So this is the situation. And what's more important, if you look at the life expectancy, China today is 2 years higher than United States. So by the year 2021, China was 78.2 years, compared with United States 76.1 years. So this is 2 years higher. If you compare, say, Shanghai and New York, two largest metropolis city, Shanghai is 4.5 years higher than New Yorkers. New York was 79 something. Shanghai is 83.5 something. So it's the gap is growing, still growing. What's more important, whatever opinion survey is, basic question is, do you think your country is on the right track? Most Chinese think their country is on the right track. So whatever Western propaganda attacking China, we are very sure that most Chinese think the country is on the right track. I.e. the Ipsos, which is an internationally more or less credible research institution, they publish annually this survey, whether your country is on the right track. It's up to 2019. Then beginning from 2020, they did not publish figure on China. So for political correct, because China is always on the top of the list for over 10 years. Now all of a sudden, by the 2020, when the COVID broke out, I think the result would be very same. But somehow Ipsos did not publish the latest figure. So my figure ends here in 2019. Now, basically, I try to summarize China's rapid and dramatic rise. I said, if you look at the Chinese history since what we call the New China, People's Republic of China, which was founded in 1949. By the way, the Soviet Union was the first country that recognized PRC. So this year we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between China and Russia. So since the 75 years, China had managed one and after another successes that all end up in China's rise. So sometimes we try to group China's 75 years into two periods. The first was the period under Chairman Mao, what we call the first 3 decades, from 1949 to 1976, yeah, roughly. And then reform and opening up since then. So the first period laid political, economic, and social foundations for China's rise. And the second period, from 1978, witnessed China's dramatic rise, economic takeoff. Roughly every 10 years witnessed one industrial revolution. For historical reasons, China missed the first and second industrial revolutions. But the beginning from 1978, roughly every decade, China experienced one industrial revolution. So the first industrial revolution, we use, say, European experience as reference. The United Kingdom became the world's largest trading nation in textiles. So China became the world's largest trading nation, largest producer of textiles, both import, export, and domestic consumption by the year 1995. Behind this is the rising of the China, what we call the township enterprises everywhere. Yeah. And the second revolution is about power. So roughly by the year 2010, China became the world's largest producer of electricity, surpassing the United States. And also its manufacturing sector became larger than the United States, and then larger than US, Japan, Germany combined, and then larger than the G7 and Western countries combined. So this is the process. And the third revolution, industrial revolution, was telecommunications, internet, computers, whatever. And China began again, since 1994, China had access to international internet. And now, China, if we use our mobile phone as a reference, you have 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, now 6G. China was way behind in 2G and 3G. But beginning from 4G, China and the West on the par with each other. We use the Chinese standards, so it's a 50-50. But 5G, China is way ahead. Today, China's 5G stations account for 70% of global total, at least 20 times more than United States, at least, yeah. And for 6G, it's still at the experimental stage. China is leading the world. And then the fourth revolution is going on, unfolding with big data, AI technologies, quantum communication, etc. China and the United States are both in the forefrontier of this revolution. Personally, I'm slightly more optimistic about China, because China has far better infrastructure and better model of development, but we can come to discuss that later. Now, its global implications, I will first mention one or 2 points. One is for those who study political science and international economics, you come across a concept called the dependency theory. The world is unfair. This international order is unfair because there is a center, Western countries, and peripheral developing countries. And the center, due to their whatever positions, say US dollar, monopoly, international institutions, World Bank, IMF, etc., and the US military, whatever, all these help to establish unfair system. It's called dependency. And developing countries had to work very hard and still dependent on the West. As a result, most developing countries remain very poor. And China, with these 4 industrial revolutions in one, achieved a breakthrough out of this stupid system. Yeah. And as a result, China itself became a center. Simultaneously, the largest partner in terms of trade, financial resources, technology, with peripheral countries, developing countries, and with the center, Western countries. So this is the position China has occupied in the world today. That's why when the trade war US imposed on China, we predict the United States will lose trade war because the United States depends more on China than China on the United States. Same with US imposed tech war on China, we also predict the United States is going to lose. It's losing, yeah. And I will come to other aspects later. And behind this is what I call the rise of civilizational state. By the way, our institution and the Oriental Institute here, we jointly sponsored a conference, a forum here on civilizational state. And we had a long session yesterday, and this morning we gave a press conference jointly with the Oriental Institute. Basically, both China and Russia are civilizational states. How to define it? The brief definition is an ancient civilization and a huge modern state. They are combined together. It's an amalgam of a time-honored civilization and the modern state. That's my definition. In the case of China, and I put forward 8 criteria. I call this 4 superb, and 4 uniques, 8 criteria. Super large population, super vast territory, super long traditions, and super rich cultures. And what's amazing is of these 4 supers, each of which is a blend of ancient and modern, old and new. I'll give you some examples. For instance, we talk about the large population. It's inherited from the past. It's historical. China has been a populous country. Yet this population has received very good education, full literacy. And China now every year produces more engineers, scientists, technicians than the Western countries combined. So this already is changing the landscape in the world. Same with super vast territory. Of course, not as vast as Russia. We have to be modest. Yet, it's also a large country, which means you can fly for 5 hours still within China. And with the same culture, you try the same food, listen to the same music, whatever. This vast territory is also inherited from history, from ancestors. Yet, this vast country is connected with the world's best infrastructure in terms of highways, bullet trains, and digital infrastructure. We are China's socialist country. We make sure that each and every village can have 4G and 5G. So this digital infrastructure is much, much better than the Western countries. If I went to Xinjiang, this Sino-Pakistani border, which was 5,000 meters high above the sea level, you can still watch videos in your smartphones. Basically, as a village, you must have this digital infrastructure. So China has become the maybe arguably the only country that has achieved with one smartphone you can do everything. Yeah, one smartphone. And this is revolution, yeah. Especially the e-commerce and e-payment. It's so common and make life so easy. And same with super long traditions and super rich cultures. And I'll come to that, give more examples when I explain Chinese model. As for the 4 uniques, unique language, unique society, unique economics, unique politics, I also come discuss them when I discuss the Chinese model. And we discussed this criteria with our friends from Russia, scholars from the Oriental Institute, from other institutions. They think Russia has also basically these 8 features also can apply to Russia as well. Yeah. Slightly different context, but you can also tell the kind of story of civilizational state. So in this sense, both China and Russia are civilizational state. Interestingly, now other countries, especially India, now is talking about India is a civilizational state. They talk about this every day, every month, every year. For one reason, I'll explain this how I feel about it. Because India, in terms of statehood, is not as strong as China or Russia. There are still a lot of separatist activities there in India. So with one civilization, they try to unify the whole country. I will elaborate this later. Now, yesterday, we were on the, in UK you call tube, underground railway station. We were in Moscow underground railway station. We took this line 3, where the stopover at the Kiev station. I saw these murals, paintings. I was deeply touched. And I took a lot of pictures. I'll show you one or two. This is the one I like very much. And this is also another one. This is another one. And this is another one. I took a lot of them. Basically, I was thinking, if at the time of Soviet Union, obviously you saw, people from from Ukraine, from Russia, from other nationalities, ethnic groups, they can live together, building their country, agriculture, industry, science, technology, defense. Yet I say, if only the Soviet leaders at that time could be imaginative and think this Soviet Union as a civilizational state, rather than move in the direction of the Western dogmatism and the propaganda about the nation state. If there is a different ethnic groups, religions, nationalities, but they all live together under one civilization, Russian civilization, or you may call Eurasian civilization, whatever. That will be one way to deal with this kind of multi-ethnic group composition. Otherwise, the country tend to go disintegrated. That's what had happened in the Soviet Union. This breakup of the Soviet Union for most Chinese was also a shock. And we really felt regret. Socialism we cherish dearly. We think we make socialism now a very successful example. We can make it. We learn a lot from Soviet Union. Yeah, we'll come to that, the Chinese model. But we learn it in a selective and critical way. We try to adapt this model, Soviet model, into the Chinese context. So if only the Soviet Union could use this term, concept, civilizational state, they could have avoided this collapse of Soviet Union. Because civilized state, from my research, we use a Marxist terminology, the higher stage of development than the American system. That system was backward and is backward. Yeah. Now I come to the China model per se. I will distill some key features of the Chinese model. Most of them have to do with Chinese civilization. First is people's livelihood first. In Chinese, we say 民本, 民为邦本, 本固邦民, which means whatever you do, you have to all end up in delivering tangible benefits for people's livelihood, material or non-material. This is a very strong Confucian tradition. Political machine cannot be what we call chatting shop, coffee shop, talking only. You must act and deliver. And whatever economic, social, cultural, other policies, they should all end up serving the people. So this is number one, people-oriented rather than other-oriented, other interest-oriented. Second, we talk about Chinese Communist Party. I call Chinese CCP as a holistic interest party. Western political parties are partial interest political parties or partisan interest parties. This again is from China's long historical tradition, because China was first unified in 221 BC by Emperor Qing. And from then on, China has been governed by what I call unified ruling entity, or you may call one-party system. Yeah. So you can see roughly, I debated with my American friends, British friends. I said over the past 2,000 years, China was in most time way ahead of the West. Yeah, at least, say, 1,700 years, China was way ahead. And in all this period, China was on the unified ruling entity. And CCP is the continuation of that tradition, unified ruling entity. It's evolution of that tradition. Without this kind of holistic interest party, the country disintegrated overnight. Yeah. So China cannot afford partial interest system. It's a vast and populous and complicated country. I debated with friends in the EU in Brussels. I said, even EU is only 1/3 of China's size. You cannot afford one person, one vote for EU leadership. You cannot afford multi-party system, scrambling for EU leadership. No way. Your EU will become useless, white elephant overnight. Yeah. That has to do with governance. And furthermore, behind this, you may call one-party rule or holistic interest party, is a vigorous process of what we call the selection plus election. Because selection is from Chinese own system, what we call the Kezhi, public servant examinations, which was created in Sui Dynasty over 1,500 years ago, roughly. And you can trace back to 2,000 years ago, the Han Dynasty, you have the Chaji. It's difficult to translate, but basically you have to have selection process, and you have the authority to examine the process, control the process, and only find the best to become the leader. I compare the Chinese leadership with Western leaders. I say if you look at the composition of the top leadership in China, see the top 7 members of Standing Committee of the Political Bureau of China, most of them, almost all, before they came to current position, had already governed over 100 million people. Yeah. They have become the governor, party secretary for 1 province, 2 provinces, 3 provinces for many years. So these are the most best tested, experienced leaders. No comparison. I think your leaders are just schoolboys. No whatever tests, experience, how you come to power, like Donald Trump or whatever. No way. There's no way to compete with China. And then philosophically, Chinese model is very much practice-oriented, practice-based reasoning. That's again very much a Chinese civilizational, because Chinese civilization emphasizes a lot on real thing. In philosophy, people ask 2 questions: to be, or what is? What is democracy? What is real meaning of life? That's one question. The other is ought to be. What ought to be the real meaning of a good society, a democracy? Chinese philosophy also has this tradition. We ask to be, ought to be. But we also ask another question, which is much stronger in Chinese tradition than in other traditions. We say to do. And to do is to be. Yeah. To do itself produce values. As Chairman Mao said, if you want to learn swimming, put yourself into water. You will know how to swim. And when China began to put forward this BRI initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, people said, how can it work? No criteria, no membership, everything's so, no roadmap, so messy. But we said, yes, we don't have a roadmap, but we have a compass. We know the sense of orientation, which direction. They began to start working on it. Gradually, 1, 2, 3 years into the program, hey, it's coming. Yeah, a roadmap gradually takes its shape. And now, BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, Russia is a big partner in this initiative, has already involved at least $1 trillion investment, and over 150 countries participating. So it's already gigantic, world's largest common good in international economic cooperation. And consultative democracy, given the size of China, we Chinese love consultations, both in low politics and high politics. In low politics, those who are familiar with China know we have a WeChat revolution. We can build a group in 1 minute and people discuss everything together. So it's a Chinese way of freedom of speech and freedom of association. It's a WeChat revolution. Yeah. And in high politics, we learned from Soviet Union, for instance, we produce 5-year plans. But slightly different from Soviet model. Soviet model we also tried. It's called the mandatory planning. You plan, say, this particular shoe factory producing how many shoes a year. No, abandon that. We call this strategic planning, direction, focus, priorities. For instance, this China now is the leader in EV revolution, electronic cars. But this is the result of 4 5-year plans, so 20 years. And then each 5-year plan, new plan, there is new adjustments accordingly, you know. And different orientations were tried. In the end, we focus on lithium battery and EV. It's working very well, the model. But it's 20 years commitment, long-term commitment. So this process of producing 5-year plan is a typical case of consultative democracy in China. The plan from the top down, down top, several rounds and many rounds, hundreds of rounds of consultation at different level of Chinese government, think tanks, within the party, outside party, and at different levels of Chinese society. So already the 5-year plan became a very important indication in China. You know, if you want to know the next stage of Chinese development, look at Chinese 5-year plan. It's very, very important. And then constant experimentation, because the country is huge and complicated. So whatever we do, we start with an experiment project, pilot project. So China's change of reform and opening up started with special economic zones in Shenzhen, in Guangdong, and in Fujian. And gradually, if it's tested well, we began to extend it elsewhere. Otherwise, we can stop it. And then this Chinese economy is a mixed economy, which means public ownership mixed with private ownership. A good example is China's internet industry. And why China can achieve this extensive use of internet in Chinese social life and economy, and China became the leader in many areas. If you look at the world's largest internet companies, Europe has none, 0. And United States and China, of the 20, 50% Chinese, 50% American companies. So on the par with the United States. And what we do is the state sector responsible for infrastructure, because infrastructure investment is long-term investment. You cannot recover your capital very fast. So private sector refuses to do that. The state sector does that. Then the private sector, non-state sector make best use of the first-rate infrastructure and do the e-commerce everything and to their best ability. That's the good combination of both sectors as successful. In the end, we also have the balance between 3 powers, political power, social power, and capital power, in favor of the majority of the population. This is important. In other words, about the fairness, justice of the society. Yeah. So we have a mechanism to achieve that balance. This is important. And in the year 2011, when Arab Spring occurred, Fukuyama, the author of The End of History, came to Shanghai. He imagined that China would also have experienced Arab Spring, had Chinese version of Arab Spring. And I gave him an answer. I said, no chance. Then I predicted Arab Spring will become Arab Winter. It became Arab Winter. I made that prediction in the year 2011. Then he said that China needs political reform. You need to have a one person, one vote, and multi-party system. I said, yes, China needs political reform. But I told him very candidly, I said, from my study of the American political system, I said, you need more political reform because your system was a product of pre-industrial era, agricultural society. At that time, America, United States was a country of several million people. Your system is old-fashioned. You cannot cope with the 21st century. Then I made another prediction. It turned out to be right. I said, without substantial reform, you are going to produce president worse off than George W. Bush. Yeah. Bush was at that time lowest rated president. Then they are going to have more to come. And this year, they are going to experience this kind of what I call the low-quality democracy again. They also predict that you are going to experience low-minded populism all the time. Yeah, that's why I say your system will go way down. And they also told him, pointed that it's not the end of history, it's the end of history. So that's my article back in the 2006, in November 2nd. I wrote a short article on the attraction of the Chinese model, allure of the Chinese model. And I said the Chinese model, however imperfect, has worked far more effectively than what can be called the American model, as represented by the IMF-designed structural adjustment program for sub-Saharan Africa and the shock therapy for Russia. Yeah. And because I came to the Soviet Union in the year 1990, I went to Zoom and other parts of Moscow. I realized Gorbachev's reform was a failure. And he listened too much to the American advisor, which is totally wrong. Yeah. And so after why I wrote this article in the year 2006, because I traveled over 106 countries. I tried to have an overall grasp of the Chinese model and the American model in the international context through international comparative studies. So I came to this humble conclusion. It turned out to be right. That said, I well remember Chairman Deng Xiaoping telling the visiting president of Ghana, Jerry Rawlings, in September 1985, he said, please don't copy our model. If there is any experience on our part, it's to formulate policies in light of one's own national conditions. That's the key message from the Chinese model. Don't copy any models, but follow your own national conditions and then produce your own models. Other models can be a reference. You can learn it selectively. Perhaps attitude makes all the difference. China is viewed by others as modest, America as arrogant. China leads by example, America by lectures and sanctions, if not missiles. So I wrote this back in the year 2006, word for word. It's reliable today, no problem. Yeah. Now, Chinese socialism, its success and its future. China has become the world's largest economy now by purchasing power parity. If by US dollar dominated calculation, maybe within 5 years. Yeah. China will have a middle class twice the US population in a decade. Yeah, this is for sure. Now 400 million, already larger than US population. And it will become more in the 10 years. And China has achieved medical insurance and pension for all. So this is also impressive. And China now is the world leader in renewable energies, the leader. Yeah. And China also at the forefrontier of the fourth industrial revolution. As for global impact, I think international order is increasingly moving from a vertical one in which the West is above the rest to a horizontal one in which the rest and West are on a par with each other in terms of ideas, wealth, hard power and soft power. And also is moving from unipolarity and multipolarity. In this process, civilizational states like China, Russia, India are the key players. Yeah. Not long ago, EU diplomatic representative Borrelli, he said, regrettably, he said, now if you look at the global south, they have alternatives for everything, ideologically, militarily, economically, technologically. If you look at these four aspects, ideology, military, economy, and technology, these are the four pillars of the Western unipolarity and the Western system led by the United States. But all of a sudden, people find the global South have alternatives for all these four. Yeah. Military, ideology, technology, economy. Yeah. Is the Chinese model an alternative to Western model? My answer is both yes and no. Let's say no. China, unlike many other nations, China has no messianic tradition. China does not seek to impose its model on others, does not seek to impose its value on others. We think it's up to other countries, other nations to find their own values. If you want to learn from China, we are very pleased. But if you don't want to learn from China, we don't care. That's the Chinese position. China has a high degree of political independence that few other countries can match. Because China is like Russia, one of very few countries that can say no to the United States. By the way, I always told the American friends, I said during the Cold War, Soviet Union and United States were two superpowers. But these two superpowers did not fight each other. It's a Cold War. But the China and United States fought two hot wars. In Korea in the 50s and in Vietnam in the 60s, the 70s. In both wars, the United States lost. Yeah. So I constantly remind Americans about this. And China has a long history of a strong and neutral state. Strong means the power of state, because it's the fast, large country. And this tradition of relatively strong state is always there. And then backed up by a meritocracy system. And when we say state is relatively neutral, which means it's selected from examination, the competent officials, they try not to be biased against any particular group or favor any relatives, whatever. So this is a long tradition. So these why in the China model may not be copied. Why yes? The essence of China model, a country should endeavor to find its own ways and means for development and prosperity in light of its own national conditions. And second, many of Chinese ideas and practices may inspire other countries. For instance, today, if you look at the BRI initiative, one idea is zooms, yeah. Economic zone, special scientific zone, trade zone. This idea is very popular in the whole process of promoting BRI. Same with 5-year, 10-year, 3-year plans. So we have companies, think tanks, which are especially good at designing this for other countries, other economies, other cities, other provinces. So part of the Chinese experience. And the Chinese model may usher in a paradigm shift from the Western paradigm of democracy versus autocracy to what I call good governance versus bad governance, which is far more sensible than the Western paradigm. Yeah. After all, at the end of the day, it's about governance, quality of governance. And finally, this hapless former president of Afghanistan, he gave an interview. He said, if we had a choice to begin again in Afghanistan, we would certainly opt for the Chinese model of development. It's quick, decisive, and result-oriented. It brings out results to all. So that's a great model. It's a bit too late, but yet he made a sensible judgment. And finally, many, many thanks from the bottom of my heart. Thank you very much. 40 minutes.
Thank you very much for such a wonderful lecture and here to present in this Russian library.
Okay. Ah, really?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Ah, good. Yeah. We also got some books, some presents for you. 我的书呢? Yes. Good.
So,
I will give this, yeah. So this is my books in Chinese, Civilizational State. And one for you and one for the library.
thank you very much, Professor.
So let's have a picture. Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah. So now we have Q&A session.
Yeah.
So questions?
Professor, thank you very much for this brilliant lecture, and I must say it was, to some extent, maybe enlightening even. My question is, if I may use Western propaganda as a stepping stone to my question. You see, in the West, we speak a lot about how China's development is perhaps slowing in some way. Or, yes, thank you. Or maybe how this development can be, let's say, hedged by some foreign influences. My question is, do you see any objective obstacles on China's way to development as a civilization state? And what obstacles would you put forward be it foreign or internal.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think, in the mainstream Western media, at this particular moment, it has been going on for 1 or 2 years. Basically, the Chinese economy is not doing well. We think it's a part of the United States propaganda, deliberate. It's part of their overall scheme for financial warfare against China. They want to attract Chinese capital to United States. That's the basic assessment. So whether an economy and economic situation is good or not, you need an international comparison. If you look at China economy, last year, we registered economic growth of 5.3%, which means it's bigger than the other G7 countries combined. We contributed roughly to at least 30% of growth, increase the growth of the world GDP for last year. So our contribution to global economy is more than G7 combined last year. Even with that, you think it's not good. I think it's ridiculous. Then, rather than repeating Western stories, the Chinese approach, part of Chinese model, we are very down to earth. We don't look at the American figures. Its GDP is diluted by big margin. Yeah. Basically, we look at your power consumption. We look at your growth or non-growth of tourism. We look at other indicators. In the case of China, our power consumption, power production has been growing. And our tourism, domestic tourism, has already surpassed the year 2019. And then we have another criteria, what we call is, does your economy have new pillars of growth? China has. We have Huawei, which represents the rise of Chinese computer industry, chip industry. And we have BYD, etc., representing the EV revolution. All these are new. The whole chain of production is entirely within China. And so I think whatever, it's in a much better shape than other economies, especially than the Western countries. Yeah. By the way, we have also noted Russian economy is in a reasonably good shape. And because before I came here, many people said that because the Russian economy now is a war economy, so the growth depends on production of weapons. No, actually it's reindustrialization. Because I think Russia also, for a time, was triggered by the American neoliberals. Economy became hollow out. So now began reindustrialization. It comes very quick. We asked this underground railway, both the train and the elevator, produced in Russia, in recent years. So it's a sign that Russia is making rapid progress. So congratulations. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. And I had such question. From some people, I hear that Chinese economical system is a mix of socialist and market system. Can you agree with it, and how can you describe?
Yeah, that's true. I'm glad you mentioned it's a mix of the socialism and the market system. Yeah, because by the year 1992, China has formulated its own economic model. Officially, it's called the socialist market economy. Because in that year, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping made a very important comment. He said, the market mechanism is ideologically neutral. It's not capitalism or socialism. It's a tool, an instrument. Capitalism can use it, socialism can use it. See, Chinese economy now, we no longer regard market as capitalist. We regard socialism as a combination of market and state ownership and other things. So private sector, non-private sector, they work together. By the way, we have to be grateful to Soviet Union, because Deng Xiaoping came to Moscow in the year 1926. He spent 11 months, almost 1 year here. That was the still the era of learning what's called the new economic policy. Because at first, Lenin practiced what's called the war communism, which means everything was collectivized for the war. But gradually he felt you have to relax the economy. So he began to welcome foreign investment, began to have a private ownership, etc. So Deng Xiaoping saw that when he was in Moscow. So he said that communism, socialism can be flexible. But in China, the ideological debate about market was continuous for many, many years. In the end, Deng Xiaoping said, don't argue on that. It's neutral. So we began to follow this, what we call the socialist market economy. And it really brings about new life into socialism. If you go to Shanghai today, you compare Shanghai with New York, I think it's way ahead of New York. I do not use the US criteria. It's, if you look at the per capita GDP, New York is 4 times higher than Shanghai. I said, my goodness, we look at other indicators, life expectancy, household assets, median level, Shanghai is richer, and street security, safe, China everywhere is safe, yeah. And infrastructure, 20 years ahead, etc. So if this is criteria, you can make comparison. I also made a comparison between Xinjiang and Mississippi, because Shanghai and New York are what we call the developed regions of the two countries. But Xinjiang and Mississippi are relatively less developed regions of the two countries. Xinjiang beat Mississippi. Yeah. So we have to, be innovative with, even with creating standards, new standards, because the US standards and their created standards have a lot of loopholes and problems. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you indeed for such a thought-provoking lecture. And I happen to have a question concerning the role of the BRICS in the current international system.
Mm-hmm.
So the BRICS is known as an entity gaining momentum in countering the West. However, there are certain problems with its future concerning the ongoing debate about whether it should be institutionalized or it should not. And my question is, what would be your stance on the feasibility of institutionalization per se, and the necessity of it? And moreover, could you please elaborate on the outlook for the BRICS?
And in fact, BRI is rather promising, because by now it's 10 years and a half. If you look at the figures, it's $1 trillion invested, 152 countries participated, and over close to 5,000 projects, big and small, together. Why we are less worried about this as you do? Because BI follows what we call the golden principle, discussing together, building together, benefiting together. A company or a country, out of its own interest, to join BI or not join. If it's in your interest, you come. We don't force you to join at all, And again, it's not anti-West. It is, we're open to the West. We openly, just not long ago, told the French, I think we have a lot of projects in Africa. We'll be more than happy if you can join third-party cooperation. Yeah, it's even open to the United States. But the West has this a kind of jealousy. When BI was first announced, the West said, oh, that's nothing, it's imaginative, it cannot work. As I said, it's no roadmap, chaotic, the communist preference for grand projects. No, that's the, but now increasingly they became more and more worried, because they saw so many projects are now with China and other global South countries. Some countries see the whole infrastructure. Chinese companies, you come here to do it, etc. So they're deeply worried. So the United States and the West have already produced their version of BRI. Yeah, I forgot. They have all kinds of names, but the latest one is from India to Middle East to Europe. Yeah, and I was joking. I said, with my knowledge of the United States as poor infrastructure, it's because BRI is largely had to do with infrastructure. That's the basic thing, you know. But U.S. capacity for infrastructure is very poor. I said the next 5 years, not to mention 3 BRI projects, whatever proposals, there are no chance to achieve them. I say within next 5 years, you cannot even redo or repair the very poor quality and collapsing, you know, New York railway system, metro system. If you compare, do you remember the U.S. TV anchor Carlson, who interviewed President Putin? And he went to Moscow subway, and he said, "My goodness, it's so much better than New York." Yeah, yeah. So that's true, you know. And so United States is extremely weak in infrastructure. I compare this level of infrastructure. China and United States is like playing ping pong. United States is way behind. It's no chance to do well in infrastructure. They have to come to China for help. Otherwise, they have no chance. Yeah. So I'm far less worried about this. Yeah, because first, out of its own interest. Second, it's already gaining momentum. And furthermore, most Chinese companies involved in BRI are private companies. So usually private companies, they do not do this kind of business, which lose a lot of money. Yeah, they have to calculate more than state enterprise. Thank you.
The last question, I think. Who wants to do it?
Could you also identify yourself, say a few words about yourself?
Thank you for the lecture. Sorry, my English is bad, but I want to ask you about demography. You know that everywhere in the world, birth rates are low and low and low.
Yeah.
And I know that in China the same. How to enhance the birth rate in China, in your opinion, of course. Because I know to pay for a child is ineffective. So, what is your opinion? Thank you.
You know, I belong to those who are less worried about this demographic crisis. For one thing, because when I was growing up, for instance, I have 4 brothers, 1 sister, it's a big family, you know, 6 children. And for many, many years, what we heard was China had to reduce the population. I remember there was a detailed study, and we read very carefully. He said for the Chinese landscape, the optimal, the best size of population is 800 million. So I haven't seen any serious study to challenge that. Although many people say it will be a crisis, it will be a crisis. In fact, you know, Chinese civilization approach is always dialectical. You know, Chinese word for 危机 crisis means crisis and opportunities. So now we develop vigorously what we call the gray hair industry, you know, for the elderly. It's a new sector booming. Yeah. And furthermore, with AI and which China is using extensively, you don't need that labor force. Yeah. So again, if there is a crisis, maybe 20 years from now, but not at this particular moment. Of course, the state, as Chinese state, is also promoting population growth. Again, if you find that China is, I call the amalgamation of hundreds of states into one with long history. For in the province where Confucius was born, Shandong province, population grows faster because the tradition there is stronger for family, for same with the Henan province. But in Shanghai it's going down, etc. So it's very much diversified. But if this crisis, we have ways and means to deal with the crisis. So not that pessimistic. Okay. We can continue a bit. We have time?
Because you said that it's only for 30 minutes.
No, I said 40 minutes.
My name is my name is Alexander Grigoriev. I'm working for Institute of Natural Monopolies based in Moscow. So, and I feel so old here. I was born in 1978.
Oh, so young.
My question is about infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Yes. Because what's happening in China and the sector is marvelous. It's never seen before in world history.
That's true.
But don't you think that you're growing too fast? Growing too fast, investing too much, and all this infrastructure, not all, part of it, could be underused or something like that. Do you see these risks, or maybe I'm too, seeing things in many little dark light? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Yeah, there are always, individual cases where maybe oversupply of certain industries, certain sectors. But the Chinese feel that we can still have room for infrastructure development. So this is important. And if you look at Chinese 5-year plans for infrastructure at national level, at city level, at provincial level, they did a lot of study and research and to make sure that it will work. But indeed, as you said, there are cases in certain provinces, there are many problems, oversupply infrastructure. Yet, this is again open to debate, but it's not a major problem. On the whole, supply and consumption infrastructure is balanced. People love better infrastructure. Now, Chinese culture is fascinating because it's a very old civilization. But the Chinese people embrace everything new. What we call the old and new combined. They love these gadgets one and another. They love the best infrastructure, and also, I don't know why, because Chinese culture is to a great extent secular. It's less religious. It's secular, which means a lot of internal competition. We say Zhuan, internal competition in all areas. But with internal competition, you also have better service. For instance, if you order a meal, you use your mobile phone. In 10 minutes, 15 minutes, here in your home. So they compete for faster delivery and better delivery, whatever. So it's not only infrastructure, it's also other aspects. There you have, for instance, if you go to Xinjiang or Tibet, yes, you see many highways and railways, not many users. But we know, geopolitically, geostrategically, they are very important. So if you have a long-term view rather than short-term view, they are useful. For national unity, for national integration, for national defense, for other things. Thank you.
Why, in your opinion, was Russia unable to follow the same development, but as China after the collapse of the Union? Maybe we have factors effect on the situation, maybe economy factors, maybe social factors?
Yeah. If you look at the difference between Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet Communist Party, one key difference is by the time when Gorbachev began his reform, his memory of Lenin was already dead. He forgot Lenin completely, Stalin completely. But when Deng Xiaoping began his reform, Deng Xiaoping was the same leadership, same generation of Chairman Mao Zedong. And Deng Xiaoping was 10 years younger than Mao, but he lived 10 years longer than Mao, who became the second generation of leaders. So of course, he was not going to abandon socialism, abandon Mao. And when the Soviet Communist Party held the 20th Party Congress, which criticized Stalin in a secret report, Deng Xiaoping was present on behalf of the CCP. He attended that conference, and he said, you cannot treat an international figure this way, he said to the Soviet Communist Party. And when Cultural Revolution came to an end in 1970s, many people said Mao made so many mistakes and we should criticize Mao. And then said Mao was 70%, and is 70% correct, 30% wrong. So that's how we handled. So in other words, in the end, especially we look back today, it's so important to keep Chinese socialism, to keep the leadership of the party. By the way, when Gorbachev was in power, I was told when he was asked, how do you think of Gorbachev? He said at that time, within very small circles, he said, this guy looks intelligent, but stupid. I told this to many Russians, they share this view. Yeah, he lost this. He has so many bargaining chips. Even you lose, you don't lose that way, you know. So it's kind of idealistic, we're childish. So as a not sophisticated, and fortunately China still stick to socialism. We think it's most Chinese think socialism is right, but we have to incorporate many elements of capitalism. Yeah, Deng Xiaoping said we should learn and borrow whatever is good in human civilization, including capitalist, but you must keep socialism in dominance. That's why we keep this overall balance: political power, social power, capital power, in favor of the most Chinese people. So most Chinese are beneficiaries of this decades of huge change. Thank you.
Oh, that's a question. Narrowing down from the ideology and citing the country's leaders, going back to the international and global impact of Chinese development, unique model of Chinese development. Do you think that, and what would be your personal outlook for influence of China in the world building a single world community process, taking the Asian Development Bank and influence of decision making in Asian Development Bank or the development projects, and in the World Bank in terms of the contribution, the membership? So these are the two things. What is your personal outlook? And the second one, what is your personal outlook for the Chinese global impact, influencing decisions, development decisions, investment in the development financial institutions?
Basically, you may have noted, this G7 held its summit in Italy not long ago. but G7 is increasingly irrelevant. There's no impact, or not much impact on the world. You cannot, dictate Russia. You cannot dictate China. You cannot dictate India. Even you cannot dictate a country like or the guerrilla forces, the Houthi, and in Yemen. So obvious, the United States is losing its influence. The West is losing its influence, because if you look at the economic structure, today's BRICS represent roughly 39% of GDP, and G7 31%, purchasing power parity. Yeah, so that's decisive. And furthermore, I remember I was in Davos 3 years back, and German Chancellor Merkel came to deliver a lecture. And she said, very honestly, she said, we have to reform World Bank, IMF, international financial system. He said, China is no longer waiting for us. If we do not carry out these reforms, China is creating their own institutions. We have created Asian Development Bank, BRICS Bank, and BI initiative. It will be eventually institutionalized, answer my previous question, yeah. But it's true, so we are not waiting for the West to, West, very strange. We were in St. Petersburg for this economic forum. I met former Austrian foreign minister. He is now very pro-China and Russia. And he said when he was Austrian foreign minister, he went to Brussels. He said, what's the Brussels position and position paper on BRI and on certain projects put forward by China? The Brussels said, we don't have any material, any position, any paper on that. So you just say whatever you want to say. Behind it, she said it's arrogance and it's stupidity, as if they were still, the leader of the world. If I was watching the Euronews this morning, they said the world leaders gather in Italy for G7. World leaders, it's ridiculous. Who cares about you now? Yeah. The other day, I was asked by in Malaysia a question concerning Taiwan. He said, if you were unified with Taiwan, if the Americans, militarily intervene, what would be your response? I said, the Chinese culture is a modest culture, and we tend to give face saving to others. Same with the United States. We still call you the superpower. But if you intervene militarily in South China Sea or over Taiwan, next day you'll no longer be a superpower. That's the end of the superpower. Yeah. So we'll give you some face. That's it. Yeah. And if you understand that, we can live together very well. Yeah. But if you don't, you want to change China's core interest, you can provoke a war. As I said, when China was 50 times weaker, 100 times weaker when the Korean War broke out, they crossed this bottom line, and you will lose. That's it. Yeah. China is among the major powers at the highest threshold for the use of force. Again, from Chinese, the famous classics, Art of the War by Sun Tzu, number one principle is be cautious about warfare. But again, if you cut into China's core interest, there's no other way. We have very clear red lines. If you cross that, then collision will be inevitable. And most likely, the United States will no longer be a superpower next day. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, we have our speaker has a very straightforward, very short one.
Central Special Correspondent for Taiwan News Agency. And my question is, how does China see Central Asia in the development of BI initiative in the future?
Yeah. Central Asia is a very important part of the BRI. For one thing, historically, the Silk Road went through Central Asia, from Xi'an of China all the way to the west, and then it began to divide into several roads through India, Afghanistan, Central Asia, to Europe. So that's the how historically it's part of the Silk Road, and indeed, still today they are also very active. For instance, not Afghanistan, Kazakhstan. All these 5 Central Asian republics are landlocked, and now they can have access to the Chinese harbors through the internal railway system in China, etc. So they are on the whole very positive about BRI. And same with, because China show very much respect for Russia's interests as well. And we think China and Russia can work together to promote both BRI and also Russia's what's called the Greater Eurasian Initiative. And both are hand in hand with each other. And again, if there are any difficulties, we sit down together, discuss together, and try to solve differences. So this approach, as civilizational states, both China and Russia historically experienced many of its own ups and downs, chaos, successes. So we knew the world, and we knew how to have normal relations with each other through patient dialogue. We find common grounds and resolving differences. So I'm optimistic about Central Asia, about the China-Russia cooperation in that region as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Finally, we have to finish, I think. Dear Professor, thank you very much for this wonderful lecture and this fruitful discussion. Dear colleagues, thank you for your active participation. And we're really happy to see many of you here. Thank you very much, and we will be very happy to see you in Moscow once again. And
thank you.
The theme of our project, which is here, can we ask you about group photo with us?
Oh, yes, with a great pleasure. We still have some time. This is the last day of our visit.